Episode 7, The New Popular Girl. Bessie went to class and sat at her desk. She arranged her books and got her pen out to write her name. She rested her head on her right palm and held the pen in her left hand. Her slightly tilted head made her look even prettier than she already was. Practically everyone in the classroom was stealing glances at her. Bessie's deskmate, Mary Smith, was nervous to talk to her. "Hello, Bessie, I'm Mary, a student committee member for studies. You can come to me if you need any help." Bessie turned around to face her deskmate before breaking into a smile. She didn't look so cold after all. "Hello." Mary blushed a little. "Are you a left-hander?" "You could say that." Bessie was writing a little slowly with her left hand, but she wasn't in a rush. "The math teacher gave us a paper this morning. I have to collect them and hand it in before class starts," Mary quietly said. Bessie found the paper she was referring to, skimmed through it, and then stuffed it under her desk. She was in a much better mood than yesterday and didn't appear as distant or hot-tempered. She tilted her head and smiled, asking sweetly, "Can I not hand it in?" Mary blushed a bright pink, grabbed the stack of papers, and dashed to the office. Bessie took a book out of her bag and wrote her name on it. There were too many people in the classroom who were checking Bessie out, more so than in the morning. Even kids from other classes were hovering by the front door and peering at her. Bessie was used to such attention and didn't care about them. She put on her earphones and tapped away at her cell phone, playing an online game that had recently become popular. The guys surrounding her were nudging one another, but not a single one dared to approach her directly. After a while, Paul and Kenneth came back. Paul nudged Kenneth on the shoulder. "Look, that's Bessie. Isn't she stunning?" Kenneth took his book out and got ready for the next lesson. He seemed distant and uninterested. He didn't even look up. A classmate with crew-cut hair chuckled softly as he scrolled on his cell phone. "Paul, when has Kenneth ever laid eyes on anyone else?" "Shut your damn mouth." Paul kicked his chair and asked, "Why are there so many people outside?" "Looking at that new girl?" the same classmate said, his eyes still fixed on his phone. He suddenly stopped scrolling and raised his cell phone up high. "Wait, what?" Paul turned around and looked at his screen. It was a social media page of Brightbow High. "Absolute beauty, is that Anne?" There was a picture under the title. In the picture, there were a few kids on a street. They looked wounded and some blood stains could be seen on the floor. Not too far away stood a girl dressed in a Brightbow High uniform. She was slim, and her smile was radiant. She looked pretty laid back, and even though the picture was pixelated, her pretty face was in clear focus. There were more than 500 replies to that post. "What's this girl's name? This isn't what Anne looks like." It didn't take long for one of her classmates to post a reply as well. The classmate with the crew-cut hair lowered his voice and tried to hold back his excitement. "The new most popular girl in Brightbow High." Bessie was oblivious to all that was happening. She still had her earphones on as she played her game. Daniel's call came in, and she hung up nonchalantly. He called again. Bessie sped up and finished the game's round. She then got up and walked out. As she walked, everybody's gazes followed. The classroom that was filled with chatter suddenly became quiet. A group of people gathered at the back door. Bessie removed her earphones with one hand and glanced at them. She looked them in the eye. Everyone instantly made their way. Bessie got past the crowd and headed straight for the restroom at the end of the corridor. Daniel called again. She found a cubicle, sat on the toilet cover, and answered the phone. Daniel had just treated a wounded child and was ruffling his head gently. He held the phone to his ear and walked away. After lighting a cigarette for himself, he smiled. "You haven't replied to my text message this morning, and now you're hanging up on me?" "I'm in school." Bessie was fiddling with the earphones. "Get to the point, my class is starting soon." "There's something." Daniel puffed a ball of smoke, received a first aid kit from someone, and thanked him before going on. "I've looked into the documents you gave me." "What did you find?" Daniel paused for a while before saying, almost in a slur, "So I got the CIA to investigate it. But why did I see your name in the CIA list? Should I get my eyes checked?" Bessie was silent for a few seconds before she shifted her sitting posture. "Impossible." Daniel hid the medicine box and bit his cigarette. He seemed to chuckle a little, his voice gentle and sweet. "You're pretty confident." The bathroom door opened and someone came in. Bessie gave a faint, "Yeah?" and then lowered her voice. "What the hell did you see?" But Daniel wouldn't lie to her. "Your name was on the list. They're investigating you." Daniel smiled at the little boy who handed him a candy. Then, he squinted his eyes and walked in the other direction. "Did you leak your own information accidentally when you helped me check for stuff last time?" "That's even less possible. No one can find it." Bessie stood up, her eyebrows raised slightly, and she casually tucked her fringe behind her ear. "I'm hanging up if you have nothing else to say." Several girls were whispering outside. Bessie opened the stall door and went out. The girls were not here for the toilet, and they just stood by the sink. Bessie accidentally saw Anne in the middle. Anne pursed her lips and acted as if she didn't know Bessie. She stood among the girls without even raising her head. The whispering voice disappeared instantly because someone suddenly came out of the stall. The whole building was suddenly quiet. Bessie pushed her phone back into her pocket and walked 2 steps forward. The hair on the side of her head slipped. "I want to wash my hands. Thank you." The group of girls backed away. They couldn't help but look at her. When Bessie washed her hands and left, the girls reacted. The girls looked at each other. Bessie's face was too recognizable, and a baby-faced girl said, "This is Bessie? She looks beautiful." Another girl saw Anne's expression and immediately poked her waist. The baby-faced girl almost bit her tongue and immediately changed her tune. "According to the boys, in real life, she looks average. The boys are acting like they haven't seen a girl before. Anne don't care about what they're saying in the comments. She fights and skips classes and even messes around with the other high school students. She's obviously not a decent girl." The first lesson in the afternoon was Mr. Scott's math class. Before class, Paul took out his mobile phone and found the post on the site. He kicked the chair in front of him and handed his mobile phone to Kenneth. "Kenneth, the new girl is the most popular girl now. It's Anne's sister, isn't it?" Kenneth was doing a math problem, and he didn't even glance at him. "The class is about to begin." "Damn you." Paul took back his phone and saved the photo. The teenager sitting beside him laughed. "Kenneth only has Anne in his heart. Paul, you can forget about it." Paul held a pen in one hand and his cell phone in his other hand. He looked at the Brightbow High School social media and, after a while, suddenly said, "Did she really fight with a group of high school students?" "How did you know?" Several boys around him were very concerned about Bessie's affairs, and they immediately turned over. Paul pointed at a post and frowned. "She's provoked Brian Jake's group. After school, they want to go find her." At the mention of Brian Jake, everyone in the back row scoffed. They glanced at Kenneth and were afraid to speak. Previously, only Thomas Smith could match up with Brian Jake, but he had already graduated 2 years ago. There was only Kenneth now. However, Kenneth was cold and spoke little even to Anne. It seemed like he had a bad impression of the new popular girl and probably wouldn't help her out. So, she'll only be having a hard time in school from now on. Bessie supported her chin and sat down with her back leaning against a wall. She closed her eyes and lowered her head halfway so that her fringe fell over and crossed her brow bone. At the end of the afternoon class, Mary handed over her notes to Bessie and whispered, "Do you want to look at these?" Bessie sat up and took it slowly. She kept the paper and smiled slightly at her deskmate. "Thanks. Do you know where I can buy books?" "No problem," Mary blushed. Sure enough, even though her new deskmate looked fierce, she was still easygoing. "I'll show you where." Bessie wanted to buy extracurricular books, so Mary took her after school. She told her about the school on the way. "There's someone you must not mess with in our school." Mary had been from Brightbow Middle School, so she knew everything about Brightbow High. "Anne. Before you, she was the most popular girl here." Bessie had one hand in her pocket and the other hand held her phone. She raised her eyebrows when she heard this. "Anne Smith is very powerful and is one of the top 5 students in our school. Not only is she pretty, but she also plays the violin. Every afternoon when she has practice, people will go over to watch her. Most importantly, Kenneth is protecting her." Mary lowered her voice. "Some girls who didn't like Anne have been taken care of by Kenneth." The two talked as they walked outside the school. The 3rd year of high school was released late, and many people hurried home from school for dinner, and the road was quite empty. Nearby. Anne, I heard your brother is back. Paul held a cigarette and lit it, smiling. He used to call her Popular Anne. Anne's expression remained the same. Yeah? Kenneth stood by her side, and although he was neither warm nor cold, his attitude was much gentler. Paul laughed. I want to have half of your brother, so my dad won't deduct my pocket money. He took a puff, and before he even looked up, he heard the roar of a car. It was very loud. Paul rubbed his ears and stepped aside, cursing. The car stopped not far ahead, and it was clear that they were surrounding the two girls. A fiery red car was in the front. Obstructed by the car, one of the girls' thin, arrogant figures looked extremely familiar. Anne took a step back and lowered her eyes. Ryan Jake is in the front. Shall we go a different way? Kenneth frowned. There were two girls in front of him, facing away. He couldn't see their faces, but one of their thin backs looked quite arrogant. Before he spoke, Paul said, Anne, go back first. If there's a fight here, I don't want you to get injured. Paul had specifically detoured here. Anne glanced at Kenneth. He wasn't bothered by the chaos in front of him, and his face was relaxed and calm as usual. So she was relieved. My driver is over there. I'll go back with him. She paused and said, Go back soon, too. Anne got into the car, but the driver didn't drive off right away. He said hesitantly, Miss, over there, that's... It's okay. I'm hungry. Let's go back. Anne tilted her head and smiled. The driver started the engine and drove away. Mary's face turned pale as she looked at the cars surrounding them. She clutched Bessie's hand. That's... She looked at the teenager sitting in the red car with his eyes narrowed, as if he were watching his prey. Her voice was tense and her palms were sweaty. It's the high school bully, Brian Jake. The same Brian Jake who people were discussing in math class. Mary fidgeted nervously when suddenly a low, hoarse voice laughed behind her. Will this incident give Bessie a chance to practice her moves? Or is it a signal of danger for both Mary and Bessie?